came across a video on YouTube about a year ago about how to look your best on Zoom. I think the biggest shock of the pandemic closed down wasn't being cut off from other human beings, but having to see my own face staring back at me during every meeting we held online. The woman who made the video had some good ideas. Lighting is important. Harsh lighting accentuates every flaw and facial feature. And where you place the camera is also important, she said. Below your face is worst, and that often happens with people who use their phones and put them down on tables. No one wants to be looking up your nostrils while they talk to you, she said. And if the camera's too high, then no one can see your eyes. You look shifty. You see, it's all a matter of perspective. Oh, and that happens to be the topic of this morning's service. Not camera perspective, of course, but how we look at things around us and how our thinking changes when we change our mental perspectives. Good morning and welcome to First Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Church in Fort Worth, Texas. Reverend Foerster here, your guide to this morning's stories and readings, questions and responses. Let us begin our worship as we usually do with music as Misha Bresnev starts our Sunday journey. Our call to worship this morning is an invitation to join the journey by Lynn Cox. Come, you accidental pilgrims, you who find yourself on a journey of surprise and wonder. Come, you who emerge into this place as an act of liberation. Come, you who seek a life of mindfulness and a place to test your thoughts. Come, you who bring hearts of all kinds, heavy hearts, rusty hearts, hearts broken open in revelation, and hearts full of love to share. Come, you who seek courage, and you who have more courage than you realize. Come, you who stand behind the curtain, gathering up the resources to claim your truth. Come, you who have been in a bubble, you who are poised for transformation. We begin our story again, gathering courage and love and mindfulness and a sense of purpose. We gather as people of all ages, different abilities, different backgrounds, and different perspectives. We share a covenant, a direction for our shared journey, and a commitment to encourage and challenge one another to spiritual growth. This path will ask much from us. Let us move forward with love. Let us move forward with appreciation for one another. Let us move forward knowing we are not alone. Whoever you are, whatever your gifts, you are welcome to join this journey. A chalice lighting this morning. Let me get this candle lit. A chalice lighting is called an all-animal chalice by Mark Causey. We light this chalice spark of the original fire of creation, to remind us that we all on this planet, the furred, the feathered, the finned, and the scaled, along with us, the featherless bipeds, we're all made of the same star stuff and all share a common destiny. We all share the same hopes of a life free from harm and suffering, and the same aspirations of happiness, love, and flourishing, being able to express our own unique natures and capacities as best we may. We are just that many diverse perspectives from which the whole is seen and experienced. We are inextricably intertwined, interconnected, and interdependent. And that is good. Please join me in singing our opening hymn, number 175 in the gray hymnal. We celebrate the web of life. Our lead singer this morning is Della Purdon, and the words will be on your screen.
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing, for we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole in cactus and in quail, as much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land, and air, which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Usually at this time we share a covenant reading, but I found a reading this morning that talks about what a covenant is. I thought you might want to hear that before we read our usual Sunday words. Lisa Ward says, a covenant is not a definition of a relationship, but it is the framework for our relating. A covenant leaves room for chance and change. It is humble toward evolution. It claims, I will abide with you in this common endeavor, be present at best as I can in our becoming. Now, this calls for a level of trust, of courage, and sacrifice that needs to be nurtured, renewed, and affirmed on a regular basis. A creed creates a static truth, something that does not incorporate new insights and realities, but a covenant is a dance of co-creation, keeping in step with one another in the flow of our lives. A creed seeks uniformity and a unison voice, but a covenant seeks harmony and a shared voice. Sometimes we may arrive at a unison, but it's not required. A creed gives authority to the statement. A covenant gives authority to shared intention. A creed creates an us and a them, but a covenant invites relationship. A creed is a prescription that must be relied on, but a covenant relies on the treasures of shared truth. The overall trust in this covenant is in the truth with a capital T, something which no one person can fully see, yet something which each and every person can come to know in glimpses, in another story, in epiphanies. Truth is ever changing in our seeking to understand because of our limited perspectives. We grow into a deeper sense of the meaning of all things when we take our journey seriously, with full heart and mind. The courage within this covenant is in the acceptance and celebration of life, with all of its challenges, its pains, its ironies and joys. And the sacrifice within this covenant is in the letting go of dogma, of assumptions, of control, and giving over to a greater wisdom which comes to us in bits and pieces. Now, with this knowledge of what our covenant really is, let us share the reading of it with one another. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Before we look at how religion gives us different perspectives, let me ask you this. What is your personal perspective about religion itself? Is religion that which you were taught as a child, to which you either cling or from which you flee? Is it a firm and unyielding thing, or is religion that which grows and evolves as you seek to understand your own growth and evolution? Give it some thought. But right now I want to share with you for all ages. It's called Walking with the Wind and was written by Karen Johnson. But it is a true story that comes to us from John Lewis, an American statesman and civil rights activist who served in the United States House of Representatives for Georgia's 5th Congressional District from 1987 until his death in 2020. I think yesterday might have been the anniversary of Lewis's death. Lewis was one of the Big Six leaders of the groups who organized the 1963 March on Washington. He fulfilled many key roles in the civil rights movement and its actions to end legalized racial segregation in the United States. In 1965, Lewis led the first of three Selma to Montgomery marches across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. In an incident which became known as Bloody Sunday, state troopers and police attacked the marchers, which included Lewis. Lewis had lived a long and full life, asking of himself and asking of all of us to show up for justice, to do what we can and just a little bit more to make sure there was more fairness in our country. John Lewis grew up in a large family, and he said he would spend time with his aunts and uncles, with his siblings and his cousins. Oh, there were many children in the neighborhood too, and they would all play together. In his biography, Lewis tells about a time when he was playing outside at his Aunt Neva's house with about 14 other children when a big storm arrived, a kind of storm that made him very afraid. Now, I'm going to tell the story from his perspective, so it's like he's talking. So when I say I, it really means Mr. Lewis who's speaking from now on. Aunt Seneva was the only adult around, and as the sky blackened and the wind grew stronger, she herded us all inside her house. Her house was not the biggest place around, and it seemed even smaller with so many children squeezed inside. Small and surprisingly quiet. All of the shouting and laughter that had been going on earlier outside had stopped. The wind was howling now, and the house was starting to shake, and we were scared. Even Aunt Seneva was scared. And then it got worse. Now the house was beginning to sway, and the wood flooring beneath us began to bend. And then a corner of the room started lifting up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Well, none of us could. This storm was actually pulling the house toward the sky with us inside of it. And that was when Aunt Seneva told us to clasp hands. Line up and hold hands, she said, and we did as we were told. And then she had us walk as a group toward the corner of the room that was rising. From the kitchen to the front of the house, we walked. The wind screaming outside, sheets of rain beating on the tin roof. And then we walked back in the other direction as another end of the house began to lift. And so it went, back and forth. 15 children walking with the wind, holding that trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. This is me, Annie, talking again. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be inside of that house? Afraid that it might fall all apart from the destructive force of the wind and the rain, from the whole storm? I'm so glad that John Lewis wasn't alone, that he was there with his friends and family. I'm so glad that they figured out a way to work together. When John Lewis was much older and was writing down the story of his whole astounding life, he wrote these words. More than half a century has passed since that day, and it has struck me more than once over those many years that our society is not unlike the children in that house, rocked again and again by the winds of one storm or another, the walls around us seeming at times as if they might fly apart. It seemed that way in the 1960s, at the height of the civil rights movement, when America itself felt it as if it might burst at the seams. So much tension, so many storms. But the people of conscience never left the house. They never ran away. They stayed, they came together, and they did the best they could, clasping hands and moving toward the corner of the house that was the weakest. And then another corner would lift, and we would go there. And eventually, inevitably, the storm would settle, and the house would still stand. But we knew another storm would come, and we would have to do it all over again. And we did. And we still do. All of us. You and I, children holding hands, walking with the wind. I like that story. It's a beautiful story. Remember it. So, perspective. The first thing I think of when I hear the word was myself learning to draw it. My father showed me one day when I was about 7 or 8 how the road disappears when you look down it at a long way. And then he took a piece of paper and he drew 2 lines getting closer and closer like this as they got further away from the place where the 2 stick figures he had drawn were standing. And I saw it right away. I saw how the paper, flat and 2-dimensional, added another dimension when perspective was added to the roadway. And after that, he showed me another trick. He showed me how to take a square or a rectangle and make it look like a box. And you take the square, and then you just angle the lines in parallel sides, he said, and you connect the square on the other end of those lines. Well, I spent the next several days filling pages with boxes of all sizes. Look, I showed him, you can do the same thing with a triangle and make it look like a pyramid. Perspective was my new magic. Well, it took me a few more years to realize that you could see other things in perspective, not just drawings. If you changed the position where you stood when you viewed an idea, the idea itself became 3-dimensional, or took on a new shape and meaning, or disappeared completely, became inconsequential where before it had appeared huge. Put it into perspective, people would say. It's one of those inspirations you might find embroidered on a pillow or on a banner you can carry into battle. Put it into perspective. But it's one of those things that if you don't use it, you tend to lose it, or forget about it, or fail to apply it when it might be useful. It's one of those things you lose sight of if you don't talk about it. And that's why I'm going to talk about it today. Perspective and religion. I think it's important. Now, you might remember my sharing with you before a chapter from Elaine de Botton's book, Religion for Atheists, A Non-Believer's Guide to the Uses of Religion. That's right, the uses of religion. Talk about putting things into a new perspective. He isn't concerned with believing or not believing, with dogma or doctrine, with morality or sin, with catechisms or commandments. He simply looks at how religion has been used over time and useful throughout history. And he asks, what if we were to dismiss it entirely? What would take up the slack? De Botton admits he is not a believer himself, but he says that the two most useless tasks in the whole world are one, trying to prove that God exists, or two, trying to prove that there is no God. Look instead, he cautions, look at what humanity has built into its various religious faiths and what religion has done to support or destroy human endeavors. If loving kindness is stressed in most religions, and it is, but we decide religion is a fool's game, who besides possibly our mother is going to remind us to be loving and kind? Not the government, not the business world, not our competitors for attention in the world. And he asks similar questions about community, about education, about art, and other ideas that come up in religion. But it is perspective which intrigues me the most, possibly because I'd never thought of putting the two together. In his chapter on perspective, de Botton wrote, "For atheists, one of the most consoling texts of the Old Testament, that's the Hebrew Bible, should be the book of Job, which concerns itself with the theme of why bad things happen to good people, a question to which, intriguingly, it refuses to offer up simple, faith-based answers. Instead, it suggests that it is not for us to know why events occur in the way they do, that we should not always interpret pain and punishment, and that as punishment, and that we should recall that we live in a universe riddled with mysteries, of which the vagaries of our fortunes are certainly not the largest, or even as we will become aware, if only we can look at matters from a sufficient remove, among the most important." You may remember in the story, Job refuses to lose faith in God, but he does begin to question why he, a good and loyal follower, has been brought so low by loss of family, of business, and of health. And Job's God reminds him it is not his to question the way the world operates, because he did not build it. He didn't design it. He didn't nurture it, nor does he understand how it really works. Who is this, God thunders in the story? And remember, it is just a story. That darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge. Gird up now thy loins like a man, he says, for I will demand of thee, where wast thou when the foundations of the earth were laid? Out of whose womb came the ice and the hoary frost? Doth the hawk fly by thy wisdom? And after that, Job begins to understand, as we are meant to understand from hearing the story, that we are fragile, limited creatures that can't possibly know the way the universe works and why, and therefore do not have the right to assume that it should always benefit us just because we are well behaved. Job is reminded of the scale of all that surpasses him, and reminded how petty are man's disasters in comparison with the ways of eternity. He begins to understand how misinformed we were when we were told in Genesis, and believed it, that we had dominion over all the earth. How foolish was that? We are only beginning to realize. In other words, to put it more in modern terms, when man plans, God laughs. There are no guarantees with this existence, and none of us will get out of it alive. Well, that certainly puts things into perspective, doesn't it? But there is more. which I'll share with you when we come back to the topic. But for now, I have a generosity report. I have good news for you all. You may remember last week I told you about our restaffing for opening up in September, of increasing Thomas Earthman's job in religious education to make him the half-time DRE, and getting a new choir director and adding to Carl's job as a membership manager. Well, all those things, of course, will take money, and we have been going forward on faith. We have submitted grant proposals to North Texas Unitarian Universalist churches, which is a support for us. And this week we received the news that we got the grant for the religious education director's job, not only for this year, but half of it again for next year and half of that for the third year, so the church can get used to paying for a job that people had been doing as volunteers. I am so happy. We are still waiting for a grant on our music program, but are assured that people are looking at it very positively. Is that not good news? And thank you, NTUC, for your generosity. I have a reading right now called Singing in the Night by David O. Rankin. He said, "I love to go deep down in the silence, to strip myself of all pride, selfishness, and coldness of heart, to peel thought after thought, passion after passion, till I reach the genuine depths of all. To remember how short a time ago I was nothing, and in how short a time again I will not be here. To dwell on joys, all ecstasies, all tender relations that give my life zest and meaning. To peek through a mystic window and look upon the fabric of life. How still it breathes, how solemn it marches, how profound its perspective. And to think how little I know, how very little, except the calm of the silence and the singing in the night." This would be a good time for us to sing again. Let's go to hymn number 86, Blessed Spirit of My Life. Della, Misha.
Blessed Spirit of my life, give me strength through stress and strife. Help me live with dignity. Let me know serenity. Fill me with a vision. Clear my mind of fear and confusion. When my thoughts throw restlessly, let peace find a home in me. Spirit of great mystery, hear the still small voice in me. Help me live my wordless creed as I comfort those in need. Fill me with compassion, be the source of my intuition. Then when life is done for me, let love be my legacy.
Let love be my legacy. Nice thought to hold on to. So are you beginning to see how we might change our perspective about life, about our own life and the lives around us, about our faith, by the stories we tell of our histories and our beliefs? Well, Job wasn't de Botton's only example of religious perspective. Moving away from the Bible itself, he asks, and what about Spinoza? Baruch Spinoza, you may remember, was a 17th century philosopher writing at the very beginning of the historic period we call the Enlightenment. Spinoza had some shockingly interesting views on religion. He never argued against the existence of a God, but he came close enough to be expelled and shunned by his Jewish community at the age of 23, which included his own parents. Spinoza took on a more secular argument about religion and regarding the questions raised in Job. God was for him merely a scientific term for the force that created the universe, the cause of itself, or causa sui. As a philosopher, he recommended that during moments of frustration or disaster, which happen to all of us, we adopt a cosmic perspective, re-envisioning our situation under the aspect of eternity. My mother used to put it more succinctly, saying when we cried about something, in another 50 years it won't matter to you. The first time I heard that, it did not console me. But I must admit that the fact that she said it about so many dissimilar situations was in itself consoling over the long haul. Use your imagination, Spinoza reminded us. Step outside yourself and practice submitting your will to the laws of the universe, however contrary these might seem to your intentions. De Botton sums up this chapter with these cautionary words. The signal danger of life is a godless society, is that it lacks reminders of the transcendent and therefore leaves us unprepared for disappointment and eventual annihilation. When God is dead, human beings, much to their detriment, are at risk of taking psychological center stage. They will imagine themselves to be commanders of their own destinies. They will trample upon nature, forget the rhythms of the earth, deny death, and shy away from valuing and honoring all that slips through their grasp, until at last they must collide catastrophically with the sharp edges of reality. I have seen that. It sounds familiar. He went on to he didn't go on to say, this is my thinking. Our own Ralph Waldo Emerson and his fellow believers in transcendentalism said much the same thing in their own way. Nature is not only the water we swim in, but it's the teacher of all we need to know. People, the transcendentalists claimed, are inherently good, as is nature. It is society and its institutions that have corrupted them both. Emerson said we need to become more self-reliant, seeking out the divine inherent in the everyday, rather than waiting for it in a distant heaven. Theirs was a different perspective from the more classic Christian doctrines of follow these rules and don't make waves. And then remember, Buddha much earlier had offered a different perspective on life when he said that all life was suffering, but that it was caused by our own desires, insistence upon how life should be and what it had to offer. So think about it. What kind of perspective do you hold about your life, its unfolding to this point, and what might follow? Let's look at our options in a way different, in a very different world from Buddha's, Job's, or Spinoza's, even Emerson's, after we come back from our weekly communion of names and milestones. I have a few stories to share with you today. Good news stories. Connie Nolan was back in the office this week, ready to tackle putting all of your pledges into the bookkeeping records, ready to send your receipts for tax purposes at the end of the year. You might remember that way back in April, she fell and broke something in her left shoulder. She couldn't drive. Well, she couldn't do much of anything. Her husband, Dan, brought her to the church a number of times, but with her arm in a sling, she wasn't much good at the computer. But she's back, and happy for it. A little bit of pain, but physical therapy is helping there. So good to see you, Connie, and thank you for all you do. I also learned that this week is Della's birthday week, our singer today. She is having a birthday next Thursday. I also want to share with you that the walls are up, smoothed and painted around the parlor where the water main broke and blew out the walls, and we had to do a lot of deconstructing. Tile is on the bathroom floor. Carpet is coming next week. Christina Lucas has volunteered to wash all the toys in the nursery, which was also hit by that water, now that it is coming together with the parlor, and put them all away to await babies and toddlers when we open in September. And yesterday, many volunteers came to church to begin bringing the building and the grounds back into shape. Carl has set up the sanctuary to aid in social distancing when we return. Families will sit together, and then a single chair between them and the person or group that comes after them. It's all coming together. The planning is going slowly but surely, and it is all good. At this time, we usually meditate in silence together, but I would like to read a meditation to you this morning called At This Quiet Time by Edward Atkinson. So sit, if you will, with your eyes closed and just listen to my voice. At this quiet time and in this place of worship, we would seek to know more deeply what it means to love one another. We know so well our own needs. We know that we ourselves need understanding, affection, and recognition. Why is it then that so often we hesitate to extend these precious gifts to others? The cost of a kind word is small. The moment that it takes to listen could hardly be better used. A gesture of forgiveness can mark a new beginning. An embrace or a note of appreciation can convey crucial encouragement and comfort. And yet, so often, we fail even within our own families to live by the sacred command that we should love one another. O Spirit of life and love, strengthen our faith, increase our resolve to give more generously of ourselves. We pray for the courage to take the risks of love. We pray for the insight to see ourselves and others in perspective. We pray for humility and understanding that we may always stand ready to forgive and begin anew. Amen. I have a responsive reading that will be on your screen, and I've asked Della to come and say it with me. I will be the one, and you and Della will be the many. We would go deeper.
We would become the selves we cannot even imagine today.
We would become courageous.
We would grow to delight in congregations filled with different perspectives.
We would know unutterable joy.
We would be filled with gratitude.
May we go deeper.
May our time together open our hearts and sharpen our minds.
May our learning know no end.
May we find the sacred within and around us.
May we see the beauty in each other's faces.
May we find our way to the depth of our being and there know holiness.
Amen. Thank you, Della. And happy birthday if I don't see you before Thursday. I think Unitarianism and Universalism both, and now their combined outlooks, have often taken a different perspective on life, death, fate, and faith, the varied topics of religion. I think it's why we were called heretics throughout our histories by those of a more dogmatic bent. I think this isn't a new idea, but just a slightly different perspective, if you will. I came across an interesting thought by author Mark Nepo just before I sat down to gather my own thoughts on the topic this week. He had written, "It doesn't take long for each of us to accumulate an emotional history. Our emotional associations and reflexes run deep within us. When we are calm," he goes on to say, "our emotions are like a calm lake, and in them we can see ourselves clearly. But when our emotional history is tapped, even if we don't remember its source, the lake becomes muddy and dull for a moment. We cannot see who we are. We react in anger or disappointment or self-doubt to an old hurt, a tender spot that has been touched by a new experience. We need," he suggests, "to wait until the waters are calm again before we can see ourselves clearly and react with caution and compassion. Wait for the ripples to settle," he suggests. I like advice when it is graphic so that I can recall it with an image. Wait for the ripples to settle, to remember who you are when you can see clearly and react with caution and compassion. In my own life, I recall that I knew I had come of age, really become an adult, when I realized I could not depend upon others for my own happiness, that I had to be in charge of it myself, define its goals, seek its possibilities, entertain its limitations. Well, if someone did add to my happiness, that was a plus, an extra blessing. And that resolve to be in charge of my own happiness carried me through many hills and valleys in my life until one day I realized happiness is a fleeting thing, a moment of recognition that had both a beginning and an end. And I realized that for me, a truer blessing was to live a life of contentment, where happiness and sadness were both occasional visitors. That perspective, not to expect constant happiness, somehow made me even happier. I have declared my spiritual goals to be kindness and compassion, treating others as I would want to be treated, and seeking a way to understand both my own reactions to life and those of others. I do not always succeed, as those of you who know me already have guessed or know from experience. When I fail, I try to be compassionate with myself. I try to maintain the same attitude one must have when meditating. When we are trying to clear our mind, our monkey brain often begins a conversation of its own. The meditator is advised to say, a thought, begin again. There is no failure in this manner, only a recurring beginning of the meditation. And I do find perspective in meditation. I also find it in journaling. I find it in laughter and in tears shared with others. How do you remind yourself you are not in control of this life, no matter how many goals you set, how many hours you work, how many times you love or are loved, and how many times you fail? How do you slant the line you are drawing so the highway diminishes in the distance, so the square becomes a box and the box becomes a tunnel in perspective? Where do you find consolation when your plans are thwarted by something not in your control? Is it part of your religious faith? Might it become so? De Botton ends his chapter like this: religion is more acute than philosophy in understanding that it is not enough merely to sketch out such ideas in books, because we are almost certain to fail out of the habit unless we are firmly and consistently reminded to change our perspective. Myopically, the scientific authorities who are officially in charge of interpreting the stars for the rest of us seem rarely to recognize the therapeutic import of their subject matter. Space agencies inform us of the properties and paths of the heavenly bodies, yet they seldom consider astronomy as either a source of wisdom or a plausible corrective to suffering. It is religion that takes on that perspective. Please join us in our closing hymn, number 1064 in the Teal hymnal, Blue Boat Home.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue boat home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I ply the starry sea, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, the making our way through the light of the heaven and the beautiful blue boat home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on.
Stella confided in me that's one of her favorite songs, and she sings it at home to her children. I'm so glad I chose it today. It's a beautiful song. I want to extinguish our chalice that has burned as a way of our looking at our togetherness in a perspective of covenant and not creed, in a perspective of interdependence, so important in our individual and community lives. My benediction is also by Alain de Botton. He wrote, "To answer our need to be repeatedly connected through our senses to ideas of transcendence, we should insist that a percentage of all prominently positioned television screens on public view be hooked up to the live feeds from the transponders of our extraplanetary telescopes. We would then be able to ensure that our frustrations, our broken hearts, our hatred of those who haven't called us, and our regrets over opportunities that have passed us by would continuously be rubbed up against and salved by images of galaxies such as Messier 101, a spiral structure which sits toward the bottom left corner of the constellation Ursa Major, 23 million light years away, majestically unaware of everything we are and consolingly unaffected by all that tears us apart. In another 50 years, none of it will matter. So may it be in all our lives."